Hello. Um, we are talking about, oh, I can't minimize this. Shoot, I was trying to minimize it so I could see my slides. Okay, so week 3, 202. The reading for this week is chapters 12 and 13. So chapter 12 is talking about body paragraphs, which are really important as we are developing, from 201 the paragraph to 202 the essay. And Dr. Harrop does a really good job of laying out just, a very formulaic approach, which is topic sentence plus evidence, right? And as I've gone through, a rough draft now with your writing assignments, the umbrella, kind of like what I had talked about last week, it's probably starting to make a little sense that, you have your thesis statement. It's kind of supposed to be a big umbrella, and now you're sticking up like little topic sentences to kind of explain how your thesis statement works, right? How you view it based on your perspective. And so you have these, 3, 4, 5 topic sentences, depending on how long your essay is. And each one of those topic sentences is a body paragraph. And you kind of have to break it down and say, okay, I have this topic sentence. Now, how am I supporting it? How am I explaining it? And we do that with evidence. And it's important to remember you only really need one piece of evidence to explain that topic sentence, because you need room to kind of break it down and explain that for your audience. That's where the word choice and the connection kind of play in, so that you are speaking to your audience. And a lot of times students just write like one sentence, and that to them, like, oh, that explains my evidence. And it's like, well, yeah, to you, because it's in your brain, right? But being able to explain it to another person, to your audience, your perspective through your lens, it's important that you break it down. So for example, writing assignment 2, we're talking about a change you wish to seek. And I've had lots of students do them on sit-stand desks, wanting their manager, their boss, to create these sit-stand desks, right? And to bring them into the office. And they're expensive, they're not cheap, right? And so usually students are talking about the health benefits of a sit-stand desk. And okay, so that's kind of like a statement, but what's a thesis statement? Why do you think that sit-stand desks offer health benefits, right? And so you kind of need to start researching and figuring out, like, well, what do I believe? And letting your research kind of dictate your thesis statement. If you kind of already come up with your ideas and then go find research, that kind of just keeps you in this one area. But if you allow yourself to ask a question, get curious, see what's out there, see what research can kind of guide you into an actual, like, real solid claim, then that's pretty powerful. And you not only have evidence and backing, but it's credible backing, which is pretty awesome. And just, depending on your audience, that is what they're looking for. So keep that in mind. Your evidence should really just be one piece, right? So if sit-stand desks offer, wonderful health benefits, which in the long run keeps your company from having to pay out, more money for healthcare insurance, or more like for the premiums. Or I've had students say, because it just makes the employees happy, which in the long term, creates, loyalty to the company, and then you're not having to deal with like high turnover, right? There's many different ways you can play why, which is what makes you, your claim a thesis statement. And so once you start building your body paragraphs and you have a topic sentence that, one component of the sit-stand desk, right? It offers, a versatility, because the employee now can choose whether they want to sit, stand, a combination, and it just gives them a lot more joy, right? And joy leads to loyalty. right? So if I'm saying that in my first body paragraph, then I need to really just focus on that and not start talking about, another company, or start talking about, payouts for workman's comp, right? We're not going into all those different directions. You're just sticking to how joy leads back to loyalty, right? Joy brings loyalty, which gives me, your employees are going to stick around. And so really figuring out, okay, well, how can I show that? How offering the sit-down desk brings joy? Well, you can decide to tell a story of a coworker that a company that statistics on the psychological aspect of the movement. There's several different ways you can approach it. The important thing is to only choose one and really break it down and explain it for your reader, because it's kind of like mini teaching, like short little mini teaching sessions on explaining your perspective. And so since you are the professional of your perspective, it's important to teach your audience your perspective. So put on the teaching hat and break it down and explain it. That's really what it comes down to for body paragraphs. That's where the clarity and the coherence come in, because you're only focusing on one thing, and you're doing that for each body paragraph. And so you kind of feel that there's some order to your paper, and then you can kind of decide and shuffle paragraphs to see what gives the best delivery. So that's chapter 12. Explaining your evidence to your audience, really connecting with them, and also keeping your audience in mind. You get to decide, hey, if the evidence I'm choosing, is it because I like it or because I know my audience will get it? Like, keep that in mind. Always keep your audience in the back. What best connects with them? It's very important. All right, chapter 13, conclusions. So now that we're getting into the essay format, conclusion, again, Dr. Harrop does a great job of creating that mathematical equation: thesis plus wisdom plus last line, which I love that idea of wisdom, because I used to always just tell students, like, give them more. Like, what's next? I was always putting that, what's next? And really, it's true. It's your wisdom. Like, now that they know this information, now that you've shared your perspective so clearly, so coherently, what's next for your audience, right? What's your piece of wisdom, the takeaway that you can give them for what should they be doing now, right? That they have all this information. What's next? And then that last line, just to really nicely close it up and leave them with something to think about. And it's just, I feel like a conclusion is a really great way to encourage your audience to take the next step, right? It's your last opportunity to let them know, like, hey, you can do this, especially for, going back to the writing assignment number 2, seeking a change. Like, you can really encourage your boss, your supervisor, your manager, saying, hey, I really want to have a sit-down meeting. I would love to collect a survey and get information for you so that you can see how many people really would benefit from the sit-down test, how many people really believe that it would bring a lot of joy and relaxation to their life, right? It's, again, like taking your thesis statement and reiterating it without like saying it word for word again, and giving your supervisor, the change maker, right, the stakeholder, the next step, saying, I'm offering that to you. And then they can decide, like, oh, that's a good idea. We can at least have a conversation about it. Or maybe they'll say, like, no, I think we're going to go this way. Then that's great. But give them something to start with, right? An idea. I think that's really great. What's the next step for your audience? What should they do moving forward? If you're encouraging a friend to do a couch to 5K, right? Let them know, like, hey, there's a race in March, and I really think that we could do it. Like, we should make that our next goal, and we should meet and sit down for coffee and really talk about, create a plan and just see what our first, small victory could be. That's what we trained for. Things like that. Like, you're talking to your audience, you're connecting with them, you've given them the information, and now you're going to give them that encouragement and that next step moving forward. So those are my takeaways from chapter 12 and 13. I think those are really useful for this next writing assignment as you are building your perspective, your case for the change you seek. So a couple things just again to keep in mind for writing this claim, right? You know, your argument. It's not really an argument. It's really just even when you're persuading, you're not trying to like bulldoze. People always think like, oh, it's a persuasive, I gotta bulldoze over them, but it's not. You know, if you think about when you're arguing with somebody, when you go full frontal, like confrontational mode, do you get what you want? Do they understand where you're coming from? No, like having a dialogue, a conversation. I feel same thing applies in writing. Really opens up your audience to possibilities, to a different perspective, and at least just understanding it. So yes, you have strong feelings for something, you have passion for it, which I think is great. It really makes writing a lot easier when you have passion for it. But really kind of think that the change that you're looking for, you want it to show them your perspective, right? And encourage them to have a conversation with you. Because ultimately, if they're the person in charge and they're the person who can actually make the change happen, you need to persuade them to think like, yeah, I do like that. I have thought about that. Oh yeah, right? So it's this nice little dance where you are the one in charge because you're giving them all this information, but yet you're kind of letting them think, you know, it's their idea too, right? So give them a reason, like why should they care about it so much? I'd love to read that in your audience analysis, right? Like why do you think your audience should be invested in this change? And really think about why it would matter for them, because again, that's kind of going back to, you know, what's their motivation behind it? What do they get from it, right? As a supervisor, they need to have reasons to explain, you know, their budget or their purchases, rather than you as the employer. Maybe they're like, I want it, right? But it needs to make sense to your audience. So if it's not for them and it's for you, you need to make your claim and make it feel like it benefits them in some way. So write that out in your audience analysis, and that will also kind of help you maybe drive some of your body paragraphs and realize like how you're going to form your thesis, right? Because it doesn't always have to be your thesis before your body paragraphs. It's kind of this back and forth as you are investigating and researching, trying to figure out what are you trying to say and what's the best way to present this information. And that's going to shift as you constantly are keeping your audience in mind. So yes, passion is important. You know, why do you believe? What do you believe and why? Why? Because why gives you your thesis statement, right? It changes, you know, from a statement to a thesis statement, because there's that why component, that extra like depth to your perspective. I already said, you know, argument's not a war, right? You gotta balance the head and the heart. So like that passion part from the heart, that's really important, but also you need to think with your head and think logically, like, you know, keeping your triangle in mind. You've got your audience, your content, you know, the evidence that you're looking for, and then like this main idea. So keeping your rhetorical choices in mind and how to play with that is very important. So the claim, just thinking about the process of, you know, I kind of already talked about this. How do you want your audience to view your perspective? What's the best way for them to get it, for them to have that aha moment? That might be different than how you reached it, right? Because you're different people. And so kind of thinking through that, what's the best way for them to get to that aha moment versus how I got to my aha moment? Keep that in mind. And then listening to both sides of the debate. Something else that I've been thinking about in writing is that there's going to be pushback, right? You're trying to present something new, and so keeping that in mind with your audience, like what's the first, once you give this information, what's the first thing that they're going to think about, or what's the first question or hesitation or concern are they going to have? Address it in your paper, right? Give your evidence, and then go ahead and just call it out. Like say, hey, I know money is an issue, right? Or I know that we might not have enough for everyone. Here's a potential solution, right? Go ahead and debunk it, address it right away, because then they're like, oh, well, yeah. Usually, you know, when you start thinking, get new information and your concern comes up, you have, you know, one or two already up in your mind. But then if you address it, like, what now? Right? They have to sit down and have a conversation, because they can understand, like, yes, you have your perspective, but also you've thought about the ways in which I might, you know, push back, and you're now addressing it. So I think that's a really great way to approach a writing a claim, like when you're working on persuading or introducing new information to someone, an approach. It's a great way to just address your audience and I recommend it at the end of your paper, not in like not your first body paragraph. But you know, it depends on your audience also. Play around with it. See what, you know your audience, so you know the best way to approach them. So play around with those paragraphs. Maybe it does make sense to already go, you know, if that person is very apprehensive to change, and you say, like, listen, I already know this is going to be, you know, a hard thing for you. Keep your open mind. I've already come up, like, have that dialogue in your paper, right? Because you're talking to them. So anyways, just keep that in mind. Right, so reasons hold up your claim, right? We talked about that. So just thinking about, you know, evaluating your relationship between your claim and your reasons, which is kind of like your thesis and your topic sentences, right? How are those working together? So you have your thesis statement and you have your topic sentences. Like, if you just write out your topic sentences first, think, okay, I've got my thesis, I've got these, you know, 5 topic sentences. Does my thesis cover it? You know, do my topic sentences hold up my thesis? And is it enough? Is it too much, too little? What else do I need? Because it kind of also helps you from overwriting. Like, you can generate all your, you know, initial thoughts, but then once you start really pulling apart, picking, generating, like judging part, when it comes time to structuring your essay, write out your topic sentences before you start even figuring out your evidence, because that can kind of help you with organization, so that when I go to read your paper, those are the things I'm looking for. First, do you have a thesis statement? Where are your topic sentences? If you don't have those, like, that's the first thing I say, like, hey, well, I don't see a clear cut thesis statement. I don't see a clear topic sentence for each body paragraph. Like, that has to get created before, you know, the rest of your paper. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be generating all of these ideas and support, but there's a, you know, a puzzle to it. So keeping that in mind, as you are, like, finding evidence to support that, but, like, how do you write that in a topic sentence that demonstrates your thesis and connects to your audience? So keep that in mind. That's what you're showing in that relationship, the claim and the reasons. So, and again, back to the triangle, right? Keeping our ethos, pathos, logos, you know, balancing that, right? Deciding what do I need? How much credibility, how much logic, how much emotion, right? Those all need to be balanced, and it all depends on your audience. Sometimes your audience needs more credibility. Sometimes your audience just needs more logic. Sometimes your audience needs more empathy, emotion, you know, the stories that kind of pull at your heartstrings. You know, maybe your audience needs a little bit of, you know, all 3. So deciding what, again, best relates to your audience versus, like, how you arrive to knowing that your claim to be true. It's important. And just remembering that facts, you know, should be contested. Like, your perspective, no matter how strongly backed it is, it's going to be contested. I mean, that's a fact. And that's okay. That's good. Use that to your advantage. Use that to address it in your paper, right? Go ahead and dive into your audience and figure out what are going to be their pushbacks, their comments, their questions, their concerns, and use it to your advantage to address it. So, yeah, because there's just, I mean, it's important to look at all sides. So, okay, for example, this was a huge issue in my house for a long time. Biting nails, right? Hate it. Never did it as a kid. Um, all three of my kids have bit their nails. It's maddening. And I guess it's hereditary, which I didn't realize. And it's on my husband's side of the family, apparently. So I had a really hard time with it. I didn't understand it. It bugged me. I felt like you could just stop. Like, why do you why do you put your hands in your mouth? And I really had to, like, I read about it. We bought the nail polish, didn't work. We did like a star chart. And I mean, my kids were in school at the time, like kindergarten. And yeah, that's when it started. And so, but after the summer after kindergarten, I noticed like during the summer, my kid wouldn't bite her nails anymore. She stopped for the summer. And she actually stopped for like a year and then started up again in second grade. And I was like, what in the world? Like, how? I thought you just maybe grew out of it, or, and so I really had to kind of like get curious and research about it and ask a lot of questions to figure out, why is my kid biting her nails? Why is she doing it? And I really had to take like an inquiry based approach because I had no idea why. I just had the questions, lots and lots of questions, but no answers or any like real idea. And I had to find the pattern, right? So I had to create like a broad umbrella. I had to create like a question that I wanted answered to create a thesis statement and go beyond just like that black and white, like yes or no. Why does your kid bite nails? Because of this. Like there's, broaden that, like get deeper, get curious, and research and evaluate and kind of figure out based on your audience, right? Because whatever fits my kid isn't going to fit, all the other children. And so kind of being able to broaden that to, my audience, if I were to write this, would be to parents, right? Parents who are confused why their kids are biting their nails, and giving them information, insight on, how I see it from my perspective, from my experience. I'm not saying it's the be all end all, but it's one person's perspective. And really, I mean, going to the next slide, like just brainstorming, like it really bugged me because, putting your hands in the mouth, the public approach, I feel like it's super unprofessional. Like, are you going to be 35 and biting your nails? No, thank you. Is there medical conditions? Like, well, give it stomach issues. Turns out a lot of it had to do with anxiety, just not having enough to do at that moment. But there's different ways anxiety can go. Some kids, my middle, it turned out the anxiety was more of like the seeking to be perfect, like the perfectionist, versus my oldest, who was just bored, like totally bored at school. And so kind of figuring that all out, right? But it did come down to anxiety for us, for my family. And so just kind of really figuring that out, like, why do kids bite their nails? Is that a disorder? I had no idea. What does it mean, like when they're biting their nails? Like, yeah, are they just bored? Are they anxious? And really just getting curious. So kind of just a good example of like how you can take something really simple, really basic, and using that inquiry-based research approach to figuring out, what is it that I'm going to address in my paper. And it did come down to anxiety, because I mean, my daughter just stopped biting her nails finally, and it was during last year, and it had come down to math. Math was giving her anxiety, and so she would bite her nails during math class. And once we started bringing math home, and I was kind of like working with her and breaking it down, and just her and I, because she had anxiety that she wasn't giving the right answer, or that she was doing it wrong and it would be, embarrassing, or everyone else seems to get it, which we all know, like lots of kids don't. And so just kind of working through that, and she actually got really good at math, and it's just multiplication she didn't really get, and fractions and all these other equations she seemed to master. But once we broke through that anxiety, she stopped biting her nails. She like willed herself and was able to like realize, hey, this anxiety has gone away, and now I can be a rock star in math, and I'm not biting my nails anymore. Like, I can do this. It's just kind of funny because I didn't have that experience at all. But I had to go through the research to figure that out. And so, again, showing you, like, going through the research to figure out how you feel about it, what you think about it, and let the research guide your thesis to structure your paper is really important. So get curious this week. Get curious this week. That is my recommendation as you work through writing assignment 2. Last thing is revising. So here's something that I really recommend. I touched a little bit about it earlier, but actually, like, underlining, where is your thesis statement? Where are your topic sentences? Do you have one piece of evidence? And is it a clear line? Like, does each topic sentence build back to your thesis, right? Do you have that? Step 1, great. Once you have that, then think, does each body paragraph have one piece of evidence that fully explains my topic sentence and that I break down for my audience, right? Do I break that down for them? Do I explain it clearly for them? Okay, then you can go into more stylistic pieces, like, how am I hooking my reader? How am I developing my introduction? How am I closing out my paragraph? How am I giving my wisdom to the audience? And what's my voice look like? How am I pulling my audience in? Am I speaking to them, or am I just speaking to myself, right? How am I connecting to my audience? And then the last thing would be, like, grammar, word choice, sentence variety, checking in with the writing center, right? Using the writing center. Do you see how that's the last piece, right? You can have the best grammar and sentence structure in the world, but if your ideas aren't coming clearly across, like, who cares? I mean, grammar is super important, don't get me wrong. But it's important if your ideas aren't excellently executed, right? So keep that in mind. And don't just think, like, oh, is it there? Like, can you find it? Can you underline it? Can you pinpoint those pieces? Because if you can't, then it's in your head still and it's not on the paper. That's the most important. Can you find it? Can you underline it? Can you show someone where it is? Because if you can't, it's not on the paper. All right, so that's PowerPoint video for week 3. Email me, let me know how I can help support you. Use the Writing Center, and that's it.